All right, welcome to this video. This is going to be I think probably the first video for my new book on um, programming psychology experiments. And this will go along with the chapter where I introduce variables, and also in that chapter we wrote our first program. So I'm going to take you through those steps. I take you through them in the book, but some of you may be watching this video not having ever heard of the book, and that's fine. So I'll take you through the steps to write the Hello World program using Visual Studio. It's super easy because you don't actually have to write the program. Visual Studio writes it for you. So I'm going to, and then I'll take you through all the steps of introducing variables and all the different variable types. Just giving you a little bit of, just getting your feet wet a little bit in declaring variables and then using those variables. All right, so we're going to double click on the Visual Studio icon to get the opening screen here, and then we're going to create a new project, and I'm going to choose Console App as the type of project for this particular one, and then next. Then you need to give it a name. I'm going to call mine Larry. You can give it whatever name you want. My first program, Hello World program, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. I'm calling mine Larry. And then create. Click on create. And a few seconds, Microsoft Visual Studio will think about it, and then boom, it's created the program for us. Here it is. Let's just run it real quick and make sure that it works. So this is all the code for the Hello World. So I'm going to run it by clicking on this local Windows debugger button here. It runs in my other window, so I have to drag it over here to the window I'm actually recording. And there you go, Hello World. That was the command we gave it. The rest of this is the debugger. This is not our program, but the debugger telling us, all this stuff, and then it's saying press any key to close this window. So if I hit the space bar or any other key, presumably, it goes away. All right, so that is the Hello World program. Now I'm going to make one change to this program first before I start introducing variables, and that is, you see how it says here std : cout, and what that's doing is that is telling the compiler, hey, I'm using the standard library. Or the standard namespace, same thing. Actually, it's probably not the same thing. Some programmer is going to, somebody who actually knows what they're doing is probably going to say, no, that's totally different. But anyway, it's telling us, it's telling the compiler to use the standard. The cout comes from C++ standard. I'm going to get rid of that. And instead, because I don't want to write that over and over again every time I want to use a standard C++ command, I'm going to put up here underneath our included libraries, I'm going to tell it that I am using namespace std. And then, remember our rule about semicolons. Every line has to end in a semicolon, except for the lines that don't. Well, this is not one of the ones that don't, so it has to. So I'm going to put the semicolon there. And now I don't need that std : before cout. Now the compiler will simply know I am using the standard C++ command cout there. And let's just make sure that that works. I'm going to click on the local Windows debugger here again, click on that to run it, and sure enough, still runs. All right. So now what I want to do is, instead of projecting Hello World onto that screen, I am going to project a variable of some kind. So what kind of variable are we going to start with? Let's start with a character variable. So in these quotation marks, I'm going to put %c, and %c just tells it that in the quotation marks I want to print out a character variable. Now I'm going to put those quotation marks in parentheses because I need now one more argument to go in here. And that is, after that last quotation mark, I'm going to type comma, and then a variable name. I'm going to give the variable name A. We're going to call it variable A. Now, I don't have a variable A yet, right? Remember from the book chapter, if you're reading the book, that we have to declare variables before we use them. So here I'm just hitting enter a couple of times to give myself some space, and I'm going to declare a variable of type char. I'm going to give it the name A, and then I'm going to give it a value. I'm just going to call it A. Why not? So I guess I should slow down a little bit to show you what I'm doing here. Let me just slow down a little bit. A equals, and then a single quote, not a double quote, single quote. Now, Visual Studio, you can see here, puts 2 quote marks. That's because it knows that for every opening quote mark, even if it's a single quote, you have to have a closing quote. And so it just puts both of them in there, but your cursor stays in between them, so now you can just type whatever it was you were going to put in between your two quote marks. And I'm going to put A. Now, to get outside that quote mark, I'm going to use the right arrow key. You could also just use your cursor, right? You just click there where you want to be. And now remember our rule again about semicolons. Every line has to end in a semicolon except the ones that don't. And this is not one of the ones that don't. So put your semicolon. There you go. Let's see if it works. Let's see if it prints out A now here. Where I say I want to print a character variable, and the one I want to print is A. Run. Drag it over from my other screen, and yep, there's our A right there. Okay, and then this is just all the same stuff that that the debugger was telling us before, and press any key, we can get rid of it. All right, so that worked. Now, maybe I don't want to print a character variable. Maybe I don't want or don't need a character variable. Let's try an integer variable. So int A, and let's give it a value. I'll just give it the value 2. Why not? Again, end with a semicolon. But now down here, I'm telling it I want to print a character variable. That's not what I want to do anymore. So instead of %c, %i, but I gave the variable the same name I'd used before, so I don't need to change that. I'm still telling it I want to print an integer now, but the integer's name is a, and sure enough it is. So this should work. Let's try it, and it should print 2. So we're going to run that. And sure enough, there's my 2 right there. Can you see that? All right, close. All right, and you should be playing along if you're in a class where you're learning how to program psychology experiments, or you're reading through my book trying to be an autodidact and teach yourself how to program psychology experiments, whatever it is you're doing right now. You should pause the video, do whatever it is I do, run it, make sure it works, and then come back to the video, start the video up again, and continue on. That's how you're going to learn how to do all this stuff. Next, we're going to try a float. So I'm just going to change A to a float. But now the thing about floats, right, is that they can have decimal values. So instead of just 2, let's make it 2.2345. Why not? But now down here in the cout command, I'm telling it that I want to put out an integer. That's not what I want to put out anymore. So instead of %i, %f for float. And let's see how that runs. Taking a little bit. There we go. And look at that. There we go. There's my float printed out on the screen. All right, so now you've gotten a little experience declaring a variable. Of course, if you're reading the book, you know that this is a local variable, right? It's only local to main because I declared it inside of main. It's not a global variable. We'll do a lot more practice with the difference between local and global variables, and why global variables are sometimes a really bad idea, and so on and so forth. But I think that's enough for now. You've gotten a little experience doing a char, an int, and a float. We also talk in the book. I talk in the book about bools, but you know, I don't want to print out a bool right now. That's enough. We're going to call it a day.